Hi everyone, welcome to the first of three Arum Public Sector Collection webinars. Today's topic is exploring the effect of COVID-19 on council tax collections. I'm pleased to say that this webinar has been set up in partnership with the IRV, and I'm pleased that we've joined today by David Magor, who's the Chief Executive at the IRV. We've also got an expert panel of two individuals who are living the issues that we'll be discussing today. I'm grateful that we've got Nick Rowe, Assistant Director, Local Tax and Accounts Receivable at the London Borough of Ealing, and he's also the Chair of the London Revenues Group. We've also got Jonathan Woodbridge, who's the Head of Revenues at the London Borough of Redbridge. And finally, we'll also have a presentation from my colleague, Nick Georgiades, who's the Managing Director at Just, giving us a presentation of the YouGov survey data that we've collected. If I could quickly ask each of our panel members to give us a quick introduction to themselves. David, if I could turn to you first, perhaps you could just give me a few voice pickets of your background and just explain what the IRV is for those who might not know what it is, please.
Good afternoon. My name is David Magor. I'm the Chief Executive of the IRRV, the Institute of Revenues Rating and Valuation. We are a professional body. Our members are drawn from the revenues profession around the world, including, of course, the UK, valuation profession, and also dealing with social security benefits and the wider issues of appeals and other matters associated with local authority finance. I've been the Chief Executive of the Institute for around about 20 years. Prior to that, so I spent the whole of my working life in local government, and I ended my local government career as Director of Housing and Revenues at Oxford City Council. I currently serve on various bodies, particularly the Business Rates Steering Group and other advisory groups in the UK. I'm also working in Ireland, assisting them with their modernisation of the rating system, particularly valuation.
Thank you, David. Nick Rowe, if you could please give us an introduction to yourself and also a little about what the London Revenues Group is.
Okay, yeah, so Nick Rowe, Assistant Director of Local Taxation at Ealing. I've been at Ealing for about 4 years now, and it sounds ridiculous, but 34 years now in local taxation and local government. So, as Farid said, I'm also on IRRV National Council and Chair of London Revenues Group, which is a networking group for all 33 London authorities, sharing best practice. We meet on a regular basis, which has probably been about twice a week, to be honest with you, since COVID started, to actually discuss some of the issues we're all facing. And one of the significant ones has been the impact on council tax collection. So hopefully be able to feed back some of the news we've had to you today.
Thanks, Nick. Jonathan, over to you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jonathan Woodbridge. I'm the Head of Revenues at Redbridge, based in the east of London. I've been working at Redbridge now for just 2 years and have 28 years in total in local government. So I'm almost the baby of this group here in experience terms. But you know, I'm a very active member of the London Revenues Group and look after some of our coordinators, some of our work there, which, as Nick has said, is an important part of our network to share best practice and experience. So really looking forward to be able to answer some questions this afternoon and hope we can share some knowledge.
Great, thank you. And finally, Nick Georgiades, could you give us a quick introduction to yourself and also a little about Just as well?
Sure. I'm Nick Georgiades. I'm a accountant analyst by background. Spent a lot of my tenure has actually been in the private sector. The last 10 years specialising in advising on collections, actually 12 years, collections and recoveries, again, mainly in the private sector, although I spent a stint with Agility's Revenue Collections, where I got to work with local authorities and some of the people on that have attended this webinar and got to learn more about the idiosyncrasies and special nature of local authority collections compared to the private sector. Taken over as Managing Director of Just earlier this year, and Just are bringing in a new form of litigation and enforcement services, adding a integration layer to panel members to ensure compliance, identification and fair treatment of the of vulnerable and people in financial hardship as you go through what is the end process in the collection stages.
Thanks, Nick. And let me just give you a little background about me as well. So my name is Freud Meir, and I'm a senior consultant with Arum. I've been here just over 8 months now. Prior to that, I've been consulting in mostly with the local government sector, both here in the UK and also in Australia as well. I spent the best part of 14 years in local government as heading up various corporate functions, improvement functions at Doncaster and Manchester City Council. I've also spent some time in Whitehall and secondment to the Cabinet Office as well. So I think between us, I didn't do any quick maths, but probably well over, well, almost probably 100 years worth of local government experience. So quite an experienced panel. I hope we can put that to good use. Before we get into the discussion this afternoon, let me just give you a few housekeeping things. I'm assuming you don't have any fire alarms planned, so, and you know where your toilet is, so I'm sure that those two things you can deal with yourself. As far as our webinar goes, I hope you can see all of us and hear us, but you won't be able to see or hear each other. We've actually got 97 people on the call, which means that I think I win the sweepstake because I got the highest number. So that's great, which means obviously that if we try and turn on talking, it's going to get quite noisy. So, but we are really interested in what you have to say, and what we'd like to do is use the Q&A button, which you should see on the right-hand side of your screens, to suggest questions that we might answer for you, but also perhaps make any comments that you might want to make there as well. I will monitor those Q&As and put a few of those to our panel as we go through the discussion, but also perhaps at the end as well. Any questions that we don't manage to answer during this session, we'll actually take away, make sure we provide an answer to them and circulate that in the pack that we will send you after the webinar. If you have any problems at all at any point, you can talk to Hannah and Prisha, who are our moderators. Again, there's a little button on your right-hand side which allows you to talk with them directly, and hopefully they can sort out any issues that you might be having. I think this has already probably happened, but just in case, could I please ask everyone to go on mute, apart from the panel, so that we're not hearing what you have to say. That just helps block out any background noise. And then the other thing, just to let you know, is that we'll be running a couple of interactive polls during this session, just to make sure that you're not falling asleep, but also to hear what you have to say about the topic that we're discussing. So, and one final thing to note is we are recording this session, as you've probably noted already, but we won't be sharing it. So please feel free to say what you want within the confidence of this group. We'll be just letting know that that's the case. Right, let's get into the session. Hannah, would you mind presenting? You've got the move to the agenda, please. Yes, thank you. So the format of today's session is pretty straightforward. In a moment, I'll invite Nick to give us a quick overview of the data resulting from the YouGov survey that we ran not so long ago. Following that, the panel and I will have a discussion about some of the issues that arise from that. And we've got three broad questions that we'd like to address today, which is what's the impact of COVID-19 on C2 collections? What changes should councils make to the way in which they go about collecting council tax, but also to help those who might be struggling with paying their tax? And finally, what changes to the powers or regulations, guidance, or indeed funding or financial support should be made to assist councils to address the challenges that they now face as a result of COVID-19. So hopefully some interesting questions there, and lots of good debate to come. Okay. Before I ask Nick to take us through, perhaps if we could have the first of our polls, Hannah, which is to ask how confident you are all in terms of how local government can minimise the potential loss of council tax revenues in the current financial year. So you should now see on your right-hand side, there's something that's saying the poll is live. So please take a look at that and fill in the button. While we await for those results to come in, perhaps if I could ask David, you've been talking to lots of people over the past few months. How would you sum up the mood in local government at the moment?
Oh, I think it's one of exhaustion. When you talk to colleagues in revenues and benefits, they've just been completely overwhelmed, particularly by a topic that we're not going to discuss today, which of course is the grants. The whole mechanism concerning the delivery of the grants has been very haphazard from the point of view of government. But I think local government generally has done an absolutely marvellous job in picking up from the government something that really wasn't properly thought out and actually delivering it for them, particularly in relation to the volumes. You know, that some of the numbers of grants and the sort of money that's been disappearing out of the doors of local authorities is quite amazing. And local authorities have done, an absolutely marvellous job in dealing with that. I think as far as council tax and business rates generally is concerned, and also other revenues, I think local authorities are in this sort of limbo land at the moment. Obviously we're still in the crisis. The crisis has not been resolved. There's still elements of the lockdown, and people are very nervous, and the public are nervous, and I can understand that nervous feeling. There's been a massive financial impact on the individual, and I don't think that's actually filtered through to local government as yet. Because of the nature of the changes, billing for both council tax and for business rates has been delayed in some cases, and we're going to start to see the real impact over the next 6 to 9 months. But in reality, I think we're going to see these problems with us for another 3 years. It's going to take that sort of time, not only just to recover revenue performance, but also to deal with all the other issues surrounding the viability of local government and how the government are going to meet these finances. And of course, the other thread that's running parallel with this are all the changes that have taken place with regard to taxation law, furloughs, social security, and obviously we've had the specific rules in relation to housing benefit and the council tax reduction and the hardship fund. So there's been so much going on, it's almost been impossible to keep up with it.
Yeah, as always, things move fast in this sector. Some of the interesting points there, particularly around the grants, and perhaps this, we can pick up some of those in some of our future webinars that we've got planned. I can see the results are now in. I think you can all see those in. Interestingly, 46% of people are not that confident at the moment that local government will be able to minimise the potential loss. 28% fairly confident, 18% neutral, and 8% not confident at all. So we'll be running that poll again at the end of this debate. So let's hope that we have something to say that might help you to persuade you that perhaps you might be in a better position at the end of this crisis, as David said. Right, let's get into looking at the data. Let's see what people have to say. Nick, can I pass over to you? Perhaps you could share the poll results that we have from YouGov.
Sure. I'll wait for the slide. Can you hear me, first of all? Let me do a hearing check, sound check.
Yeah, we can hear you loud and clear.
Good. So this is a poll that we'd commissioned from YouGov. It was taken in the middle of May, 11th to 12th of May. Just over 2,000 people were sampled. Of those, just over 1,600 were either solely or jointly liable for their council tax bills. And the figures are weighted and represented of all GB adults aged 18 plus. So we have got some granular data split by gender, age, social grade, region, government region, working status, marital status, and most of the trends that you saw at those levels were down to what you'd expect compared to the average. So what I'm not going to go through is lots of granular data, because I think that the benefit of this conversations will be to get the debate and views of the panel. But what I'll do is give you the high level view of what we saw there. If anyone does want to conversations and see more of that data, then please feel free to contact us. If we go to the next slide, the first 3 questions, we asked 3 questions. The first question, which will hopefully come up in a second. Oh, it probably will.
Coming.
I think it's probably got one of those flying things and needs to be clicked through. I've not got actually control of that, so I don't know whether that's like technical hitch.
Coming. We need more pennies in the meter, Hannah, or you're okay?
So let me
just
tell
share it
you.
on a different. We'll just share it on a different screen. We're just sorting it out. Sorry.
Okay, no problem. So what we were, I can talk it through because fortunately I've got the data here through anyway. So one of the first questions we asked was, do people think they're going to be financially impacted by this? So that was basically 57%. I'll talk it through without the 3 slides. 57% of the people questioned were concerned that they're going to be impacted financially by COVID. The next question that we asked in the survey was, how concerned are they that they won't be able to pay their bill over the next 12 months, so until 2021? And actually 25% of people were concerned. So 1 in 4 of your residents are concerned that they won't be able to afford that council tax over that period. When we asked them what should be done about that, was we said, should people be given it be cancelled or written off that bill, even if that meant to a future rise in bills for other residents. And actually, this was slightly different to a survey that we did in utilities, with 40% of people agreeing that they're happy for future bills to rise as to fund the write-off of current bills. And the interesting piece about that for me was that's 15% more people than believe they're going to be financially impacted. So this is saying people that are happy to subsidise people that are going to be financially impacted by COVID-19. So that's the situation. So people generally, there's a level of concern over this, and that's a significant issue. The next question we asked on the next slide was, if it goes up, was what will you do if you are impacted? And I think any of us that have worked in collections recoveries typically have seen inbound activity is not something that happens as often. It's often collection. When it gets into collections, it's very much a outbound activity. What we saw here was there's likely to be a significant. These are new set of people that are having financial impacts. They're taking responsibility for that. 79% of them said they would proactively contact the local authorities, which I think it would be interesting when we get to the debate to see whether we've seen any of that demand come through as yet. My view is as we've gone on to furlough, we've had people with some impact. As the furlough scheme starts to close down, we'll see more impact. So I don't think we're through by a long shot the financial impact that this is going to have, and I think we're yet to see a lot of that come to fruition. The next slide was trying to determine how people are going to make contact. So the vast majority are going to either email or phone you. So that's a lot of the phone is real time activity required. It looks like councils are going to get a lot of inbound that has got to be resourced up for. And I suppose the observation from this is I don't think all the people have been impacted yet. Is there anything proactively we can do to support and educate people to help mitigate that demand that you are going to get as we go through that? The final slide in this in the data was asking people, how do you prioritise your council tax? So we asked, what debts would you prioritise above your council tax? And actually I found this exceptionally interesting. Citizens Advice List, it puts council tax as third in their list of priority debts, only below mortgage payments and rent. Yet 42% of people would prioritise their water bill above their council tax. Citizens Advice, if you go to their website, advises that's a non-priority and they can't cut you off if that if you don't pay that debt. And even with things like loans and credit cards, etc., which are definitely a non-priority debt, 25% of people are prioritising those above their council tax. So for me, this it feels like another education of residents of the importance and priority of council tax, and it'll be interesting to hear the debate on how we will deal with these peoples and their expectations as that starts to come into the council tax or communication centres, call centres, and resource departments of the councils. That's it for my very quick run through of that. I'm looking forward to hearing the conversation and debate.
Thank you very much for that, Nick. If I could first turn to Jonathan. Jonathan, was there anything in there that surprised you at all?
Jonathan's on mute still. My trick.
Hey, I've got it right now. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's fascinating that the way that debtors see their debts and not prioritising council tax. And we see it all the time in the conversations that we're having. The most important things for them are things that are things that help them give them a quality of life, and water and the TV packages are often prioritised, as we well know. Focusing that back onto housing and mortgage, rent costs, etc., is always our number one as well. So because that will just burden those debtors back to the local authority anyway if we didn't get that right. There was another one around that Nick mentioned about the demand. I think we'll probably come on to that later on, but absolutely we need to be prepared that people haven't really grasped the digitisation and they want to pick up the phone to speak to somebody. But we really have to take a strong grip on how we channel shift into the right mechanisms for us, whilst also meeting the demand.
Are you seeing any increase in demand at the moment, Jonathan, in your team?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the demand over the last couple of months has been ridiculous. In March, it was nearly 20,000 calls, which is up on previous years enormously. But luckily, we probably halved that during the month of May, so it is tailing off. I think we're beginning to quell that demand over the last couple of weeks.
Nick, can I ask you, based sort of on what you're seeing at the moment, how is actually collection performance popping up? I mean, compared to previous years, is it where you'd expect it to be, or is it substantially different?
No, I mean, certainly for my own authority, and I think for most of London I can speak, we are considerably down. for council, business rates is worse than council tax, but obviously council tax is what we're focusing on today. I'm about £3 or £4 million down where I'd expect to be at this time of the year normally. Now, there's a number of reasons for that. I think the government issued the figures yesterday about the number of people who are furloughed nationally. There's 8.7 million people who are furloughed at the moment. These people are concerned about future jobs, and I just don't see at the moment they see their priority being paying council tax debts. We've done huge amounts of work in local authority to build up a culture of payment for council taxpayers. And I think if you look at the national stats, collection rates continually rise year on year. And my big concern now is people aren't going to prioritise council tax and will get out of that habit of paying council tax. And I think we're going to have a lot of work to do, as David said, not just this year, over a number of years, to get the cash back from this year, but also to re-encourage people to engage with us.
Okay. It's interesting you say that, because some people might argue that actually the furlough scheme has probably delayed some of the downturn, because actually lots of people, while they're on reduced incomes, are at least still getting an income. Philip McGaskill asks, how will the withdrawal of furlough impact the collection of council tax? So as we see the government winding back, and at the end of October and on present sort of announcements, we expect furlough to be withdrawn. How do you think that will affect collections for the rest of the year? Nick? Sorry.
Yeah, I think it's got a big concern. I mean, some of the people we've engaged with already who have been furloughed genuinely aren't sure if they're going to have a job when furlough ends. And I think that's where we're going to have that big issue. There's also the cost to the local authority if people do lose their jobs around council tax support. And we're going to have to be funding their council tax support charges effectively from our ongoing budgets as well. So I think it is a big concern for people around furlough, and I think we need to do a lot as local authorities to engage with customers, and as the slide said, to try and encourage people to contact us as soon as possible.
Okay, great. David, you're on various government panels trying to understand and prepare, around or deal with the impacts of this. How is this picture playing out in local government, in central government? Is it one that they recognise, one that they acknowledge, or not?
I think they do acknowledge it, but it's trying to get them to admit it. I think the real problem is that there have been so many changes in the way council tax is administered, particularly in relation to the council tax reduction scheme, over the last sort of 5 to 6 years, that I think we're now going to really find that those changes are going to really damage collection performance. It was interesting the comment Nick made about furlough and furlough coming to an end and whether people have got their jobs. I think the next most exciting statistic, if that's the right word to use, and I think it isn't the right word to use, is how many people will go from furlough to redundancy. And I think that's the real worry, where employers, particularly major employers, have been using the furlough scheme just to delay the announcement of redundancies. And I think that will be a massive impact on local authorities. And as Nick quite rightly says, this is going to be picked up then by the council tax reduction scheme. But of course, the problem with the council tax reduction scheme is it sits outside the social security scheme. And when the move went away from council tax benefit to council tax reduction, we found a situation where the DWP took the saving, that was the saving of the cost of council tax benefit, and passed that cost onto local government. And of course, now the burden of the council tax reduction scheme falls on the shoulders of local government. As a result of that, over the last 5 years, 3, 4, 5 years, local authorities have gradually changed their schemes to such an extent that the working age have really been hammered. And you can't go on challenging this particular client group in this way. So I think we're going to see some major thinking going on in central government. And I believe that this is time to turn the clock back. I think the government should accept that creating a localised council tax reduction scheme, creating a postcode lottery was wrong, that they should re-adopt the council tax benefit scheme. It should go back into social security, and it should be part and parcel of the overall universal credit system. We are living in a ridiculous time where a key benefit has been taken outside the social security system, and the burden of it has been placed on the shoulders of local government, and that's completely wrong. It's wrong in normal circumstances. In the current crisis, it's a recipe for a disaster. And so local governments got to stand up and say, enough's enough. This is grossly unfair. Let's go back to normality. And normality is a central scheme, properly funded through the social security system, and obviously linked properly into universal credit.
Nick Georgiadis, can I come to you? Andrew Smith's asked a really interesting question. Councils are actively encouraging the use of credit cards to pay council tax. How does this square with the idea of residents paying off loans as not a priority? Given your experience and what you're seeing at Just, how are people dealing with the crunch at the moment?
Well, so there's two parts: dealing with it and whether you're shifting debt from one place to another. So there's been an age-old argument of whether you should accept a credit tool to take payment of debt, and that's existed for a long time. And actually, a lot of the payment providers for the debt collection agencies and industry don't like giving them access to that facility because of the amount of chargebacks. Because one of the things, there's two big issues you've got with taking credit card. One is they're shifting debt from one source to another potentially, because you don't know whether they pay them off. The other is actually the way that that works is there's often a lot of the ability to charge back. So you think you've taken a payment, that person has quite a long time to charge back that payment. So that then reverses back out and people can play the chargeback system. So I'm credit cards should be used appropriately to take it where that is right. In this instance, you're actually paying off a priority debt with a non-priority debt. If they're paying that, it all comes down to and we talk about a lot of affordability. There's the distinguish of the tool that they use to pay, and whether they can actually afford it. So I think there's a lot about establishing affordability before taking a payment. If they can afford it, then the means is less important.
Okay, thanks for that. There was an interesting report that came out on Monday from Step Change that probably said what we all suspected anyway, that obviously a lot of people are finding these times difficult and are turning to alternative sources of credit to fund their continuing lifestyle. So and some of that obviously will result in more debt. Jonathan, can I turn to you? People not paying council tax is clearly not a new thing. It's something that you deal with every year. How is the current situation different from any other time, and how are you and your team responding to that?
That was for me, yeah. We've been here before. We've been through the recessions before, and some of us have been working in this industry long enough to see that back in 2007, 2008, 2009, we were hitting 95% in in-year collection, and we had to adapt our means of collection to get that back to a figure that was budgeted for. And I think at that time, if typically several years later, you might get to sort of 98, 99% that you'd budgeted for. But it's a hard graft, and one year compounds with another. Unlike some of the other debts that you see on the list here in front of us, they're not cyclical. So you do chip away at this stone over and over again. But with council tax, it's recurring. So it's very difficult to chip away at that. So if you're behind in 1 year, it just compounds the problem time and time again. So our techniques and our methods of nudging and encouraging people to pay and recognise what their priorities are have to change, and they have to adapt and be smarter. And we need to use the technologies that are available to facilitate that. I mean, Nick's absolutely right. Moving debt from a priority debt to non-priority debt doesn't make any sense. And I remember the days when local authorities said, "Oh, we're not going to support that." Anti-poverty strategy says, "You know what? We don't want you to pay your council tax by a credit card," and that may have been right at the time, but now local government and public actually need that money, and local government needs the money, and individuals want to use their credit card. Perhaps they've got some incentives on there that they actually want to put that through. So if you can afford your council tax, it's not an issue to put it on your credit card. And actually, we make it more difficult for people to use. We're disadvantaging ourselves, actually, their income. But we don't have a gatekeeper that says, oh, you're clearly in arrears, we're not going to encourage you to use it, or not going to give you that facility. We're going to take that payment by way either means. But I hope that we're not actually encouraging people to put it on a credit card just to clear that debt. And I think that would be a very wrong tactic and wouldn't support that.
Okay, thank you for that. David, we have some elected members on the or in the audience today, but we don't have any on the panel. Perhaps if I could follow on your experience of dealing with elected members over many years, what will you be advising politicians, both locally and nationally, in terms of how we should be dealing with this particular challenge?
Well, I think it's important through these difficult times that elected members support the officers. You know, you go back in history, and Jonathan was saying we've all been around a long time. You know, some of us on this call go back to the poll tax. I sadly go back even further. But the reality is that the elected members have got a role to play. They fix the policies. They determine the direction of the local authority, and they should stand alongside their officers in getting through this very difficult situation and recovering debt. And it's not just council tax debt. Nick said business rates beginning to show problems. There'll be local authorities with their own housing stock running into difficulties with their housing rents. There'll be numerous charges for sundry services made by local authorities. The problems will be all over the place. So I think local authorities have got to start looking at debt issues collectively. And the old phrase of the single view of debt comes into play again. But I think it's a wider issue than that. And it saddens me when you hear that there are already mentions of the step change report about council taxpayers going to third-party sources to get their money, and obviously you worry then about them going to loan sharks and getting into this sort of horrible world of the black economy. But you just hope that local authorities, through the policies pushed forward by elected members, understand and they operate with a degree of compassion. The reality is that this problem, it will be a while to get out of this problem. It will be 3 or 4 years. Local authorities will have to be patient. Government have got to play their part as well. They've got to support local authorities through these difficult financial times. And I think we'll have to see some kind of support mechanism to assure that local authority collection figures are maintained, if necessary, by government support, just to ensure that we can keep delivering the services. But I think elected members will understand. You know, they are close to their communities. I always say that local government is the foundation of our democracy, and I think this is going to be a real test of that democracy. And I hope that local elected members will take their role more seriously than they have in the past in relation to debt, and really look at the issues that their residents will be facing.
Okay. I've, like you, worked with in central government with central government departments, and quite often the argument made by central government is, well, you can do a lot more locally. You don't necessarily need more powers or more support, and obviously more money is always the easy answer. What are you and perhaps the IRV advising in terms of what approaches should councils now start to take in the short term to address this particular challenge? What should they be doing differently that perhaps they're not doing now?
Well, I think it's a case of understanding your council taxpayers and differentiating between, you know, the old phrase of the can't payers and the won't payers. What's going to happen is the group of can't payers is going to grow, and it's going to grow around circumstances. We talked about furlough and furlough coming to an end and the possibility of redundancy. You've got to keep an eye on what's happening locally in your economy and adjust your services to it. You've got to go through the old process of maximising the take-up of benefits, ensuring that that people are applying for their benefits and that you're awarding them in a timely manner, and then showing a degree of compassion. Of course, we have the government's hardship fund that's been utilised effectively by local authorities. There may be more money to come from that direction because local authorities may not be able to cope. But I must admit, I personally favour the government giving some kind of guarantee to local government, and certainly it's something I'm talking very actively with my council members on, writing to the minister with some ideas. But in reality, local authorities are very good at adjusting their policies to local circumstances. And I think what you will see is that local authorities will start to ensure that things are properly collated and that they actually differentiate between those who can't and won't pay, and they deal with the can't payers with sympathy, because that's what's got to happen. We've got to give people time. I was about to use the phrase breathing space, and perhaps that's the wrong phrase to use with the proposed change in legislation, but local authorities have just got to understand the difficulties that some of their customers are in and adjust their processes accordingly.
Thank you. Nick Rowe, can I ask you, what, from your sort of position as chair of London councils, what changes do you see happening in London? You mentioned earlier that collections are down by quite a lot in London. What's happening there? What different approaches are you taking locally?
I think everyone already has changed their recovery procedures, and I think picking up what David said about a different approach, I mean, part of that is local authorities already understanding the situation that a lot of our residents are in. The other part of it has been forced on us that the magistrates' courts simply aren't taking any cases at the moment. Most cases they're closed. We've been advised locally our court won't open until September at the very earliest. So the more traditional conveyor belt process of reminders, summonses, enforcement agents simply can't happen at the moment. So authorities are already reviewing what they're doing. Most have changed the wording on reminder letters. They're sending soft reminder letters, often advising residents of where they can go to get support, whether it be council tax reduction, whether it be signposting them to advice agencies. I think a lot of the work we're doing now has changed already in the approaches we're taking to recovery. I know for a lot of authorities, initially, there was a block on any form of recovery action, which included reminders. I think most now in London are starting to do some form of contact with the local residents to try and engage with them again, advise them that council tax hasn't gone away, it is still payable, but to listen to people, encourage them to contact us, to come to us, to talk about payment arrangements. I mean, my own authority offered a payment holiday. So for anyone who was suffering hardship, there was a 3-month payment holiday. Now, to a certain extent, we may just have pushed the problem back because on the 1st of July, people are going to have to pay their council tax over the rest of the financial year. But again, it's just listening to people, hearing their circumstances and try to work out how we can get a payment arrangement, which number one gets the revenue in for us, but also doesn't significantly impact on the individual as well.
Yeah, thank you. David made the point earlier about segmentation and understanding the difference between those who can pay and won't pay. Carl Copping asks an interesting question. Do we think data sharing with HMRC could allow us to use a less confrontational stroke invasive recovery process, post-COVID, sharing employee details, etc.? I know last year there was a pilot with HMRC. How has that gone? Is your council involved in that?
Yeah, we are. I mean, it's very early days. And I think, yes, going forward, it's something we'd all like to look into. I think the difficulty in the current situation as of today is that to do an attachment of earnings, you need a liability order. And as I've just, we've just covered, the courts won't be open. So we're not going to be in a situation, even if we were to want to go and get liability orders for this year, we wouldn't be in a position to be able to do attachment of earnings probably till October, November. And also it's just knowing what the situation will be in terms of the employment market, as David had talked about, the impacts of people coming out of furlough, whether they will still have jobs going forward as well. But yeah, certainly it's something I would be very interested in taking forward. I think the pilot has given some promising initial results, and I think it's something that all local authorities would be keen to expand on.
I mean, we hope at some point those mechanisms, with the courts and with the ability to get liability orders will come back on stream at some point, we hope. What would your advice be to councils in terms of A, preparing for that eventuality when it does arise? And secondly, I can almost imagine the first court in the new sort of era being very, very full with lots of cases. Is that necessarily the right thing? Should councils be pursuing that line of action, that traditional conveyor belt, as you explained earlier, as quickly as possible, or should we be holding back and trying other things first?
I mean, personally, I don't think we can wait for the chance of courts opening and allowing us to go back to any form of recovery action in the way we did previously. So I think as local authorities, we need to start changing our recovery strategies now. So I'm focusing on what we can do rather than what we can't do. And I think what we can do is proactively contact those residents, work with them. The reminders, yes, we use the word reminder, but it's not a reminder as such. Often it's a communication and an advice letter. And I think we should all be changing the way we communicate with our local residents. Jonathan talked about online support and digitalisation of services. Most authorities are going down that route in a big way, and I think we need to do everything we can to make sure the support is available on our websites, on our web portals, to allow people to engage with us in the way that they want to be able to engage.
Thank you. Jonathan, can I turn to you for a moment? How I know certainly in the work that we've done with you before, we talked about some of the challenges of debt that's accumulated over a number of years. And given what Nick has been saying about obviously things like payment holidays, they simply delay what might be inevitable. How do we stop what might be an short-term arrears problem turning into a long-term debt problem?
Well, I think you really have to sort of look at that, look at how we're approaching the individual debtor and looking at their individual circumstances. I mean, Nick talked about his payment holiday that they've actually gone out and publicly said, but I think you'll probably find that the same is existing in every authority, whether they were publicly saying that or not. Certainly for Redbridge, we've been agreeing to payment deferrals for a gap in payments or a reduced payment, or just rescheduling payments from now to the end of the year into the latest part of March, if possible. And we've been doing that. So we are doing some of what Nick's saying about kicking the can down the street in terms of that problem still going to come back. And that's certainly not going to be very clear to us whether we've made the right decisions until the furlough scheme comes to an end, people get back to work, or they're made redundant, or we get some clear indication as to where those debts are going to sit. In terms of the arrears, I mean, yes, in my head there are three different types of people, three categories of people that are affected by COVID-19. There are those that have already receiving support. They've actually done quite well out of this. They've probably got an additional £150. They would have had some arrears on those perhaps as well. And that's what we've done there, is made it slightly easier for that cohort to pay off some of those arrears. The other group, of course, is like you and I, who have stayed in employment throughout, who've continued to maintain our salary. And actually, we might have a bit extra money available now, disposable income, because we haven't been using that on our socialising so much. So actually, our Netflix subscriptions might have gone up, but actually we're not out dining and pubbing. So perhaps there's time to actually offset some of that against some of our arrears, and that's what I would be looking at on a case-by-case basis. But we've touched on this. The crowd in the middle, those that are furloughed at the moment, that have got a sleeping problem coming down the road of having this potential redundancy at some point later this year, is frightening. We've already seen £1 million worth of council tax support burden being added onto our case since April, and only going to increase, because at the moment that cohort is probably outside of that scheme, because those schemes not really reaching those that need it. As we've clipped the edges of that scheme over and over again, it becomes more and more difficult to actually benefit from it. So going back to the arrears point, that cohort are the ones that are going to be struggling, and we need to be looking to make sure that actually we are looking at their circumstances in totality. So it's about taking a statement of means or a financial statement, using those mechanisms to check that the expenditure is in line. We talked about the prioritising of debts, but also perhaps using some banking interface. Open banking is now available to help us understand what's really going on in that household. And we need to use these tools. So that comes back to the digitalisation edge, really. And I think those authorities that have already embarked on that or have got those technologies in place are the ones that are going to be taking off and resolving this much more quickly. I mean, I don't want to pick on all the questions necessarily because that's your job for it, but I noticed there's a question there about, is it right to start doing reminders now? Well, it's absolutely right to do reminders, and actually in Redbridge, we haven't stopped doing reminders, and I think it's telling because we haven't got this re-engagement agenda now to reawaken and remind these debtors and residents, let's call them residents at this point, that they do have the obligation to pay their council tax because we've continued to nudge them from the outset, and I think that's been the right strategy because it's paid dividends. Our income is down, but it's not significantly similar to Nick's circumstances. So I think we've done the right thing in nudging from April and reminding these debtors that there's council tax to pay.
You raise a very good point there, Jonathan, because obviously one of the points in the survey from YouGov was that actually residents said that they would expect they would come to us. They wouldn't necessarily expect the council to contact them. Are you suggesting that actually we need to turn on its head, that actually we need to be more proactive in contacting residents or communicating, as I think the word you said?
Absolutely. And I've got examples where residents have actually thanked us for reaching out to them. I think we're underestimating the effects on people's mental health. We use those words, they're quite strong, but actually it's just the distraction. There's an awful lot going on. The children are at home. People in the household are not working. They've not got the income. They watch the news. It's quite a depressing time, and actually worrying about debts is just compounding to that. So actually providing, I won't call it an outreach, but having reached out to residents, we've actually had some really positive feedback, and it has done the right thing in reassuring them that, one, we are flexible. Well, first of all, we're here, and secondly, that we're flexible if they engage. And I think it has paid dividends. And the thanks, it's really strange to get thanks for ringing people and sending them their text message, etc.
Interesting to say that. Actually, some of the clients that I've been talking to have had similar stories where proactive contact actually has been welcomed because it's helping people. And when councils have contacted those individuals, they've taken a very sensitive and empathetic approach to them. And actually, that's been much appreciated by people on the other side. Hannah, could I ask you to rerun the poll, please, to see how views have changed over the course of the discussion? And while we get that in, David, could I ask you, you talked earlier about obviously some fundamental changes to the way perhaps government should be supporting councils in terms of the benefit scheme and making it part of the welfare system. What sort of hidden powers or regulations are you aware of that perhaps we're not utilising as much as we ought to? What powers do we have already that perhaps we're not making the most of?
Well, local authorities have got a general power of competence, and that's and the extent to which you can use that is generally governed by your budgets. And of course, as both Jonathan and Nick have said, local authorities are strapped for cash at the moment, so life is very difficult. But what as I've been listening to Nick and Jonathan, and I think personally I get more confidence that individual local authorities are really up for this. They are going to get their policies right. They're going to get their relationship with their residents right. They're going to do everything within their power and within the scope that their elected members give them to make sure that they reduce the pain that's going to be inflicted upon the council taxpayer. So that then shifts to the bigger picture. And the bigger picture, as I see it, and something's got to be done, and perhaps certainly, as I've said already, my institute, I'll be talking to some of my council members tomorrow morning about a letter that we're proposing to write to the Minister about the bigger picture. But I think the Local Government Association, London Boroughs Association, all the other governing bodies should get together to actually challenge government. And the things I'd like to see them challenge them on, first is to actually recognise the fact that the impact that all of this is going to have, council tax reduction, non-collection of council tax on the council tax base itself, and whether we need to do something about the council tax base. And then, of course, as I said already, to stop this sort of tragedy of these selective council tax reduction schemes that are creating a sort of a postcode lottery. I think there should be a wider issue in relation to giving people time to pay. And when I talk about time to pay, I mean time to pay for local authorities. And I'd like to see, when this year ends, a 3-year period of recovery, and actually government recognising that that's the period of recovery, and that's the recovery of local government finances. And it could take even longer, but through that period that they relax certain measures, particularly in relation to the annual settlement and the pressures they're placing on local authorities. But again, local authorities individually should look at their provisions and see where they are with their provisions. And again, talk to government about the need for provisions. Can in some way the government offer some form of guarantee to remove the need for provisions, because provisions curtail expenditure? Deal with the whole issue around social care and social care supplements. You know, our problems that have been there, that have surfaced over the last 3 or 4 years, are not gone away. They're still going to be there. So you're going to have an increase in the bandy equivalent next year for every local authority in the land. And how will that increase be controlled? Because that increase is going to impact on the broader picture of debt. You know, should there be a change? The whole limitation of council tax increases, should that be changed? Or should, again, local authorities have some kind of guarantee? It's got to be a two-pronged attack. All the issues that Nick and Jonathan have been raising about what you do day to day in the office, and that's going to be incredibly difficult, but I'm confident that colleagues in local government revenue sections and benefit sections will be able to cope with that, even though they're under immense pressure now. And at the same time, I want to see the centre actually do something about supporting local government, and that involves generous grant settlements and everything else. Money is being found for loads of things. I think what we need to do is to find our favourite player to sponsor it. I'm seriously thinking of asking Troy Deeney, who's a Watford supporter, to support me in my challenges, because if Marcus Radcliffe can have such success with his school meals, I'm sure I can actually sort the council tax out with Troy. So I might have a word with him later.
We look forward to that. The poll results are now in, and I've got some good news and some bad news. The good news is we've actually increased the number of people listening to us. More people have joined during the course of this webinar, which is great. The bad news is actually that the proportion of participants who now feel not confident is actually gone up. So, we haven't given enough words of wisdom. We're almost to the end of our session today. Can I thank our panelists for, I think it's been a very interesting discussion. I know there perhaps haven't been a huge number of opportunities there for us to significantly change what is a very difficult and complex situation, but I hope at least members will find that we've given you something to think about and different approaches to think about going forward. So can I thank David Magor, Nick Rowe, Jonathan Woolridge and Nick Georgiades for their contributions today. And before we go, can I remind everyone listening to us that this is the first of 3 workshops that we've got planned, or webinars. The next one will be on the 1st of July in 2 weeks' time, when we'll be looking at how to prioritise some of those debts that we've been talking about, and potentially the use of bailiffs. And as David suggested earlier, perhaps we might also look at some of those issues regarding grants and various other things as well. Just also let you know that we'll be sending out a pack when this webinar finishes, which will have the data in that Nick presented earlier. And there'll also be a link for you to give your feedback on our performance as a panel and how you found this webinar. So we'll be very pleased to hear what you have to say, and hopefully we can respond to some of the issues that you've raised. So can I just thank everyone for joining us today, and our panel in particular, and I hope that we will see you again soon during our next webinar. Thank you very much for attending.
Great, thanks, Farid.
Cheers.
Thank you.